Immediately after I finish speaking, you'll get the usual review of the year from Sarah Fulder, our CEO. And then after that, we have presentations from two of the more significant people in the PLS network, Matt Flager, the Managing Director of CLA, and David Pugh, the Managing Director of NLA Media Access. Welcome to you both. I'm really pleased to see you here. We've had presentations from NLA Media Access in the past, but I think this is the first time that David has actually spoken at one of our open days, and it's particularly welcome to him to see him here this afternoon. Matt, who I guess will be a familiar face to many of you, has been with the CLA since 2008, but has assumed his current role running the CLA since our last open meeting. He's already had a considerable impact on the CLA, something you will hear more about from both Sarah and from Matt himself. So welcome, Matt. While talking about the CLA, I can't fail to mention our partners in that organisation, the Authors Licensing and Collecting Society, ALCS. And I'm delighted to welcome Adam Singer, their chairman, Owen Atkinson, their CEO, and Stevie Spring, one of their directors, to the meeting this afternoon. It's very good to see you all here. Following the presentation from Sarah, Matt and David, we're going to break for tea. And then, as we have done in previous years, we're going to split into 3 parallel streams. One in here and 2 in rooms down the corridor. And if you don't know which parallel stream you're going to, then someone will help direct you after tea. After those 3 breakout sessions, please return here promptly for something I'm sure you're all going to find interesting, and which I certainly am looking forward to, which is a presentation from our keynote speaker, Dr. Ros Lynch. I first met Ros, as I'm sure many of you did, when she was playing Batman to Richard Hooper's Robin, or maybe it was the other way around. I don't think any of us ever quite understood that. They were working together on the project that led to the Copyright Hub. And I'm delighted that Ros has agreed to be with us today and to talk on the subject of digital disruption, or simply meddling, a title which I'm sure you will find as intriguing as I do. Ros is not yet here, but I will welcome her on your behalf when she arrives. But as an aside, Richard Hooper and Caroline Boyd from the Copyright Hub are here, so it's very good to see you both here this afternoon. When Ros has finished at about 5:30, we'll be delighted to have a chance to talk to you individually in a slightly more informal context of drinks and canapes, which are going to be held in the room immediately opposite this room. Before I sit down, there are some people I want to say thank you to on your behalf. My first thank you is to the PLS board, whose enthusiasm, support and unfailing good humour are critical to the running of the organisation. Here's a photo gallery of the board as it was 12 months ago, with their trade body affiliations. I'm not going to pick out everybody. Many of them are in the room today, and I'm sure you'll recognise some of them. But we have some goodbyes this year, and I'd like to mark those. First of all, I want to say a heartfelt thank you on behalf of everyone at PLS to Graham Taylor, who's sitting in the 3rd row back. Graham was on the board for 13 years at PLS, including 3 years as chair, and he also served many years on the board of CLA. He's a huge repository of institutional memory for PLS and CLA, and we really miss him already. It's very good to see you here, Graham, and thank you for all you did for PLS over the years in which it grew to be the organisation that it is today. Your influence should not be underestimated. His replacement on the PLS board is someone who will be familiar to many of you, Richard Mullet, the CEO of the Publishers Association. We're also lucky to have Martin Rosser join us on the board of PLS, but sadly to leave again very shortly afterwards. Unfortunately, we didn't have time during his short tenure to get a proper mugshot of Martin, so instead we must depend on this long lens shot of him enjoying his favourite pastime. We're very pleased to welcome Martin's replacement as a PPA-nominated director of PLS in Nick Service, the group chair of the Hemming Group. We've even managed to get his mugshot, and he is here this afternoon. We're very grateful to Richard and Nick for their willingness to pick up their respective batons at this extremely important time in the life of PLS and collective rights management more generally. They're already making significant contributions to the work of PLS, and Richard has also joined the CLA board. My next thank you is to Joe Waters, the PLS Comms and Events Manager, who organised this event today. Thank you, Joe. You're there at the back. Thank you very much for all you've done. I'm following Joe's instructions by giving you all the necessary information to allow you to sign on to the Wi-Fi here and to encourage you to tweet from the meeting if the mood takes you. All the necessary information is there on the slide. Joe's also asked me to remind you to complete the feedback forms at the end of the meeting and to leave completed forms in the trays provided at the reception desk. Thanks are also due to all members of the small but extremely effective PLS team who are here today. And a special thank you on your behalf to Sarah Falder, whose inspiring leadership and unstinting hard work have made possible all the progress that PLS has made and that she will report on today. Sarah.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark, for those very kind words, and I'll try and follow you. It is wonderful to see so many of you here today, and I do hope you find this afternoon as at least an edifying experience as going around the summer exhibition next door. We will try and leave some time for you to ask us questions. That'll be after I've finished speaking and then after David has finished speaking in this first half. So please, if things come to mind, save them up for those points. I thought I would just start by focusing on what for me has been the most notable theme of the year, and that is the unprecedented level of cooperation and collaboration that has been a feature of every aspect of PLS's work. The central position that PLS occupies in the world of collective licensing, securing the mandates from you, the publishers, overseeing the licensing of your rights, and distributing monies back to you for licensed use of your works, has always required that PLS cooperate with several different partners. But the year stands out for the very positive collaborations we've enjoyed with both existing and new partners. And in turn, these have enhanced our services to you, the publishers. By working better with our existing partners and by extending our reach to involve others, we've been able to provide ever more efficient and cost-effective services to publishers, whilst at the same time continuing to expand our horizons in line with publishers' needs. As Henry Ford, the innovator who turned the then unknown automobile into an integral part of our everyday lives, once said, "Coming together is a beginning, staying together is progress, and working together is success." So I'm going to give you some examples of collaboration at different stages of that quote from Henry Ford. A prime example of our collaboration centres on our very long-standing licensing agent, CLA. Incidentally, I'm very pleased that Mark has explained all the acronyms to you, so I don't need to worry about that. CLA, in order that CLA can maintain its excellent revenue performance, which of course translates always into revenue growth for publishers and of course all other CLA's stakeholders. This really does demand ever greater cooperation and effort behind the scenes. In the interests of making everything work more smoothly, we therefore started the year by negotiating a new members agreement with ALCS, our co-owner of CLA, in which we agreed a clear framework of operation for CLA. Concluding this agreement was a significant achievement in its own right after a mere 30 years in partnership together. But it has also helped transform the working relationship, both as between ALCS and as between both of us and CLA. Whilst on the subject of the membership agreement, I should just mention that we took the opportunity to clarify the criteria for any future members of CLA, now that there is a right to apply for membership of relevant collective management organisations, which we call CMOs for short. This is actually enshrined in recent UK legislation and European legislation. It will, of course, fall to PLS and ALCS as the members of CLA to make the final decision on any applications for membership. within the constraints of that legislation. And we know that CLA is expecting some applications in the coming months. So back to my theme of collaboration. Whilst it's fair to say that there are, at times, issues between publishers and authors, we do believe that they have more in common with each other than not, especially when it comes to collective licensing. The inevitable tension over the split of money apart, and I'll say more about that later, there is unquestionably a lot we can do better together, whether it is ensuring that people pay for using published content or fighting for a robust copyright framework. Building on those common interests is what PLS is striving for in its relationship with ALCS through this new membership agreement. We've already started to reap the benefits of this more positive form of collaboration in our workings with CLA. As you'll hear in a short while from Matt Flager, as Mark says, we were delighted to welcome him as Managing Director of CLA only last July. Gosh, that's already a year ago. CLA does continue to go from strength to strength. CLA's exciting new developments promise to improve the offering to their licensees and thereby help to secure the future of your revenues from collective licensing as far as it's possible to do so. That all of this has been possible is due in no small part to the collaboration and support of PLS in consultation with you, the publishers, and ALCS. In addition, the fact that CLA is now jointly chaired by our own chairman, Mark Bide, and also by Adam Singer, who's at the back of the room, as in his capacity as chair of ALCS, this also underpins the collaboration between all three organisations. On a very practical level, this has meant a lot more meetings in the diary for all of us, particularly for Matt Flager, Owen Atkinson as Chief Executive of ALCS, and myself. But we're actually going to make that better too, because we've all agreed to co-locate. So this is an artist's impression of our new reception, which we'll be walking into in just 2 weeks' time. How better could the three organisations strive for success in Henry Ford's terms than by working together in shared offices? We're looking forward to working with both ALCS and CLA. Of course, we will be running our own distinctive businesses with our own corporate identities, but we will be sharing the same space. And we expect that this will lead to more efficient and effective cooperation and working together. And of course, we'll be making some savings on our general overheads. We'll hope to see as many as possible of you over time in our new home at Barnard's Inn. Our moving card is actually in your packs. Our Russell Square offices have served PLS very well over the last 3.5 years, but we have outgrown the space, and the whole team is now ready to move on, and indeed is very excited about this next chapter. More collaboration. Our partnership with NLA. We've been licensing some of the magazine repertoire now through NLA for 18 months, and I'm pleased to see that the revenue continues to rise every month. You'll hear more about this a little later from David Pugh. Despite the fierce competition between NLA and CLA for the magazine repertoire, they have worked extremely well both together and through PLS at an operational level, ensuring that any switches that publishers have chosen to make between the two of them are effected as smoothly as possible. I promised to come back to the subject of splits. A third and entirely new area of collaboration this year has been around the independent and objective valuation of rights. Last year, I touched on it when I mentioned that we had agreed in principle with ALCS to undertake a valuation. And I note from my speech that I finished by saying, of which more anon. A year on, and I can report that we're in the throes of a very major valuation exercise, presided over by independent expert valuer Mark Bazant of FTI Consulting. The driver for the valuation has been the desire and need to ensure that collective licensing revenue is split fairly and transparently between the right holders, as is expected under the new European and UK legislation that I've mentioned. Having relied on negotiated splits ever since voluntary collective licensing of photocopying began over 30 years ago, we've all acknowledged that in the digital age, it is time to split licensing revenues on the basis of evidence. Negotiating the splits without the benefit of hard evidence can get somewhat emotional. Other splits have existed for so long that no one even remembers why they are what they are, and yet they seem to cause unhappiness to many, if not all, categories of right holders, be they photographers, illustrators, or other visual artists, whose images are embedded in the publications licensed by CLA and NLA, or the publishers or the authors. The process of gathering and evaluating all the relevant evidence to enable Mark Besant to make his final decision, which he expects to deliver before the end of this year, has itself involved a significant collaborative effort. The very fact that we have a steering group made up of representatives from 5 organisations who are all key to this exercise. That's PLS, ALCS, DAX, BAPLA, who I'm delighted to see in the room today, represented by Isabel Doran and Paul Schult, and also ACS, the Artist Collecting Society, ably chaired by Toby Faber, who's on the board of ALCS. That coming together is itself a very significant achievement. I am a great believer in dialogue, and this collaboration can only be a positive thing in helping us to manage future relations between all of us, even if we cannot always agree on everything. So what is PLS hoping to achieve in this valuation? We want to ensure that at the very least we're able to maintain distributions to publishers at the levels they have come to rely on, and to ensure that collective licensing revenues are split fairly and transparency in line with actual usage and rights ownership. So, as you can see, your cooperation and support in providing the evidence to support the position of publishers is really critical. We're immensely grateful to those publishers whose titles have been sampled for the purpose of the valuation, for their work and efforts so far in answering Mark Besant's questions. But we need you all to continue to cooperate and work with us on this, please, over these next few weeks in particular. So talking of money, it's probably about time I talked about what is at the heart and core of PLS's business. That's what we distributed to publishers last year, £33.8 million. It is slightly down on last year's figure, which was £36.4 million. But actually, once you've discounted the one-off payments of last year, the underlying figures are in fact slightly up on last year. I'm particularly pleased that we've also been able to distribute to publishers for the first time in 3 years an unspent part, albeit a small part, of our 6% subvention. And that's despite an enormous amount of development work that we've been undertaking on your behalf this year. I will let both Matt and David talk to why the figures have continued to hold up so well, but I take this opportunity to thank both of them and their teams for their excellent work in selling licenses. It's really tough work to sell licenses at any time, but especially so in the current climate. So back to collaboration. You, the publishers, are our most important collaborators. For without your mandates, none of what I've been talking about would be possible. Having heard about all the PLS work I've just been outlining, you might think that we're gluttons for punishment when I tell you that we decided that this was the year to update the PLS mandate. But the fact is that the existing mandate was 10 years old and had been introduced when digital was not at all well understood. Indeed, it was feared by many. And that's why we would have to come back to you on each and every occasion to invite you to opt in license by license whenever there was a new digital license in place. of course, as you know very well, digital content and digital rights are now a part of everyday business. In addition, we have also had to ensure that we're compliant with the new UK regulations on collecting societies and the European Directive on Collective Management of Rights, both of which I've already touched on, and both of which came onto the statute books in the spring of 2014, although the directive itself is not due to be enforced in the UK until next April 2016. Somewhat unhelpfully for us, they're not fully aligned with each other, and this has added to our burden in trying to implement both. But there is good news from this legislation, and that is for you, the publishers. Because you, along with other rights holders, now have your right to choose how your rights are managed, actually enshrined in legislation. So under the new PLS mandate, which we're calling your PLS publisher account, you will be authorising us to licence all your print and digital rights. But importantly, it allows you also to exercise your choices by opting out, whether on a title basis, in relation to particular rights or licenses or territories. You have always been able to exclude rights and titles, but this is now really very clearly provided for. And to enable you to do this, we've actually upgraded PLSE so that you can actually use that to exercise your choices. It is now an integral part of your mandate for the first time. The new PLSE will also make it easier for publishers to opt into any new services that we may bring on stream. Of course, they would always be subject to consultation with you first, in the usual way. But for example, I will be consulting you shortly on a possible new service, which is to ascertain the level of interest in PLS taking on the negotiation of reuse fees with the BBC on behalf of publishers, a role previously undertaken by the PA. So I'm delighted today to be launching the new PLS publisher account. Over 78% of publishers, in terms of the value of our distributions to them, that is 1,560 publishers in number terms, have already signed up to the new publisher account. The PLS team will continue to press those of you who have not quite yet managed to sign up to encourage you to do so as soon as possible. We owe a debt of gratitude to the members of the board who laboured on this with me, and particularly Mark, Audrey McCulloch, Graham, and Andrew Yates. Tom West has also done a magnificent job in developing PLSE and getting it ready in time for today's launch. And the PLS team has cheerfully taken on the challenge of actually producing all the new documentation you see up here and inviting our 3,300 mandating publishers to sign up. So thank you for all your hard work. Turning now to other PLS developments and projects, it seems incredible to think that the 2-year pilot of the Access to Research project comes to an end in December. We have commissioned some research jointly with the Society of Chief Librarians and the Arts Council England to evaluate the project on a quantitative basis. We have on a qualitative basis, we do have lots of quantitative data already, so that publishers can make an informed decision later in the year about its future. It's fair to say it's been very well received so far, with over 90% of local authorities having signed up. But we feel there is a lot more that libraries could be doing to promote the service locally. Just to give you a flavour of the range of subjects that people are using the service for, looking at the top 20 search terms in the last month, at number 1 was Argentina 1943, maybe a school project, who knows? And at number 20 was data mining, very topical for us, and medical, historical, and many other topics in between. We also have soft-launched the first phase of PLS Clear, our dating service which matches permissions requesters to publishers. The next phase of licensing free permissions is expected to be in place later this month. And we also launched the text and data mining clearing facility, which we'll be using to help our trade associations lobby in Europe against an exception for text and data mining in the coming months. Jonathan Griffin has overseen this development with our long-standing and trusted software developers, ARC, who I'm delighted are in the audience today, James Stafford and Caroline Boyd. And with the benefit of the expert advice and guidance on permissions from our new consultants, Claire Hodder and Ruth Tellis, who are here in the front row. Thank you to Palgrave Macmillan. And Tom West, of course, ensures that PLS keeps apace with all that we're doing at PLS. The PLSE keeps apace, I should say, including not least the publisher account. It would seem that our very high data standards in PLSE, for which Tom must take much of the credit, are the envy of collective management organisations around the world. Both Jonathan and Tom will be giving a full overview of these developments in their respective breakout sessions after the break. And we've been working very closely with CLA, for example, to develop a facility to streamline the permissions process for universities wanting to make copies of a second chapter or a second article in their course packs. This service is now being piloted, and James Bennett of CLA will be talking about this and other developments in his session after the break. Now, I don't intend to talk about the many developments in copyright because I'm delighted that Ros Lynch is relieving me of that burden, and we look forward to hearing from her later in the afternoon. I would, however, like to mention at this point the Copyright Hub, which, as Mark has alluded to, is how Ros Lynch first came into contact with the creative industries. PLS has continued to support the Hub in its all-important developmental phase. The infrastructure has now been built, and new applications using that infrastructure are being developed. PLS Clear will be one of those applications, providing users with another route to publishers for their permissions. And Mark Bide has been masterful in leading the Hub board through establishing the governance framework for this open source platform. There is very strong interest in the Hub from abroad, particularly from the US and Australia. So we're very keen to ensure that the Hub gets the support it needs and the recognition it so deserves from both the UK industry and the British government. It was very pleasing to see earlier in this week Chief Executive Dominic Young, who can't be with us at the moment, he's hoping to join later, accept an award for the Hub for innovation from the Stationers' Company. But we are very privileged instead to have Richard Hooper, the chairman of the Copyright Hub, with us. Thank you for coming, Richard. So turning back to matters closer to home, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that we have reviewed and refreshed our vision, aims and values in the light of all the changes around PLS and within PLS. And you'll find them at the back of the annual review in your packs and also on our website. We've also increased our level of engagement with publishers, not only through introducing monthly introductory sessions to collective licensing instead of the usual quarterly sessions, and having many more meetings at all the book fairs, but we're making increased use of our website. In particular, I'd like to draw your attention that we will be running all future consultations through our website to supplement the traditional consultation meetings so that we can gather the views of all publishers. We have also introduced a Lookup Service on our website to help publishers see whether we might be holding monies collected for the use of their titles, but for which we have not been able to trace the publisher. I'd just like to echo Mark's thanks to the members of the board who really are incredibly supportive and constructive in all they do, and they work very hard to ensure that publishers' interests are at the heart of all that we do at PLS. And last but not least, a word about the PLS team. Having been remarkably stable for some time, we sadly said goodbye to two key and very popular members of the team this year. Lydia Murray, our very dependable head of finance, decided for some extraordinary reason that it was time to retire. I managed to keep her on for a bit longer than she wanted, but she wouldn't have any of it. She insisted on going. So she gave nearly 10 years of service, excellent service to PLS. And Antonella Pierce, the face of PLS to many publishers for the last 3.5 years, was spirited away from us by another organisation. I'm very pleased that they're both in the room today and would like to thank them publicly for all their work for PLS. And Antoinette announced in the last few days that she will be moving on to pastures new as we leave Russell Square, literally on that last day. So as you can imagine, on top of everything else, we're now very busy recruiting. I would like to take this opportunity, though, to thank the entire PLS team, most of whom are ranged at the back of the room, I see, and all our consultants, including especially Liz Ribbons, who I haven't yet mentioned, but she is well known to the magazine publishers. Please remember that PLS does exist to serve publishers. So if you think there is something more that we could or should be doing for you, can you please let me know? So thank you for listening. I'm very happy to take any questions. Are there any questions? Then I won't prolong the agony.
Apparently not. In which case, what I'd like to do is to welcome Matt Flaker to the platform. Matt, as I said earlier, is the Managing Director of CLA. I'm not going to give you a longer introduction. You can find bio details in the pack.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to Mark and Sarah for their kind words. I've got about 10 minutes, so I was thinking about how I can make this interesting for 10 minutes, and Florian set me the challenge just as I arrived and said, make it interesting, Matt, I do not want to fall asleep, it's so warm. So if I am boring, he's going to raise his hand. If you see him raise his hand, then I will change pace or do something different. So what I'm going to spend the 10 minutes on really is giving you a quick overview of our financial performance in the last year. Talk a little bit about the challenges that we face in the marketplace, and then that will lead into some of the initiatives that we're taking forward into some sectors that James Bennett will also talk about in more detail in the breakout session after coffee. So, hopefully those slides are clear. The last 4 years have been a good news story for CLA and for the rights holders. We've had a period of steady growth through that 4 years, and I think that growth predominantly has been led in the UK, where we've seen a 15% growth over the period, but we have seen some fluctuations both within the UK in terms of where we have grown revenue, but where we've also lost revenue, and I'll talk about a bit more about that in a minute. We've also seen fluctuations overseas, as you will see, one-off payments from Australia and Germany propping up the numbers in the first two columns, and then more recently we've seen some pressures in other international markets such as Canada, where there's been huge change in the licensing environment there, which will further impact the revenues that we get internationally going forward. But overall a very strong picture. So what I'd like to do is drill down into a bit of detail for the last financial year, which was a record year for CLA, 76 million in license fees, and really sort of draw to your attention a few highlights there. So I think the first thing to note probably on the UK side is that education now represents over 60% of CLA's licensing income, and within education, schools is now £19.5 million per year approximately. The size of that sector and the importance of that sector is really reflective of the fact that CLA not only represents its own rights that come from PLS and from ALCS and from DAX into schools, but we also now represent NLA Media Access, in education, and we also represent printed music in education. And our team at CLA, working with David's team, Andrew's team, and the team at Printed Music License Limited, that's a mouthful, have worked very hard to deliver that. So that's a good news story. We have had some pressures, public sector, austerity. We've had lots of ups and downs in public sector, not least in this year as well. Renegotiations in central government, challenges at local government, and I think we've done pretty well to maintain a revenue stream of around 6 million per annum in line with previous years. The other area I will mention, and David will come on to this as well, is that despite, as Sarah mentioned, some competition for magazines, we have actually all worked very well together and very professionally in this environment. And despite the fact that some magazines have moved into the NLA portfolio, our business performance has actually been very strong and is still operating at around 15.5 million per year. We issued another 750 licenses this year also. So I think the key thing on there being choice is that publishers make an informed choice. And I think the fact that we're all working together means that you can now make that informed choice, which means that users also get the best solutions that are available. So in terms of what we then do with that revenue, we put a huge amount of time and effort into collecting data so that we can accurately distribute that money onto PLS, onto ALCS, and other partners so that they can then distribute it to you. And I just thought it would be useful to share with you the size of that activity and operation. So in 2014, we undertook about 2,300 data collection exercises. And to give you an idea of what that means, we have a team of 30 field officers who are literally going around the country in their cars, by train, on bicycles sometime, I guess. And they visit schools, FE colleges, businesses, local authorities to collect data so that we can then pass that money on with confidence and authority that it's going to end up in the right place. So the ways in which we collect that data are very much changing. Historically, it used to be yellow photocopy boxes. Now we use web logging tools, census returns, we're looking at workflow tools, and a mobile app is being developed as we speak. But to give you an idea of the quantity of data that comes in, distributions last year were based on around 3 million copying events across all of those licensees. So that's a huge effort in terms of collection, validation, that then flows through to PLS and ALCS to pass on that money. So that all sounds really good, and I think CLA over the last 2 years, as our revenues have continued to grow, has sort of almost forgotten about what's happening in the market or ignored what's happening in the market, because there's been huge change happening in the marketplace. And like everybody in this room, our business models are under threat. Our users are demanding that we change. The pace of change is different by different sector. And there are 4 key things, I guess, that are making us consider change. First is austerity. A lot of our licensing solutions go into the public sector. Central government, local government have had huge cuts, so therefore they look for cuts in license fees, cuts in everything else that they buy across the board. Further education in particular has had dramatic cuts in terms of its funding. And so again, CLA, other collecting societies are under pressure to look at what new models it can build and develop working with that particular sector. In February and April last year, we ran a couple of listening to the customer days because we felt we were slightly insulated. We felt that the boards of CLA, PLS and ALCS were slightly insulated from all this change. When revenue's going up, everybody's happy, and you don't think about or look closely enough at what's happening in the market. So we invited over 40 speakers from the education sector, from government, from business, from publishing houses, to talk about why CLA needs to change. And the message came through loud and clear. I think it was an excellent thing for us to do. And the 3 boards very much went away from that event understanding that we can't just continue to do what we do in the way that we do it. So from about July last year, we've really been looking at, and I'm not sure how clear that will be, we sort of really viewed ourselves as being at a crossroads, I guess. And that crossroads has two options, funnily enough. So one is to accept that the market is changing, but also accept that we can't do anything about it, and that it will diminish over time, and that we will lose relevance. The other option is to actually listen to that market and evolve in the same way that every publisher in this room is evolving, in the same way that every content creator in this room is evolving. And the good thing for CLA is that actually, whilst it was a big step for us to consider in terms of evolution as an organisation, there are actually examples of this that have already happened around the globe. Copyright Clearance Centre in the US has been evolving for the last 7 or 8 years in terms of its offering to make itself more relevant, to actually offer better solutions to users. Copyright Agency in Australia similarly now has a content platform into the school sector in Australia. NLA Media Access have Eclipse and have been very, very progressive in the last 3 or 4 years. So what that demonstrated to our board is that actually change is possible and that we should consider it. So we went through a lot of thinking, and what I'm pleased to say is that the CLA board, the ALCS board and the PLS board all agreed that we should evolve, which is a good thing. So that has really been consuming me, my team, Sarah, Owen, everybody else who has a stake in CLA, and our customers. And I just wanted to share with you 3 examples of some of the stuff that we're doing. James is going to talk about it in more detail, but this is very much a start. So the first thing to highlight is really a basic way of us changing how we operate in the market. And in March this year, we signed a new deal with the Department for Education to 2021, so that every school in England can copy with confidence. Teachers don't need to worry about clearing copyright. They can copy with confidence and get on with teaching under a central deal that has been organised by the DFE. That deal also incorporates newspapers via NLA and printed music via the MPA. So simplification, that's one way that we're evolving, and that's one example. Secondly, we've started to introduce rights plus content solutions, and the best example of that is a new deal with NHS England that was signed 2 weeks ago in partnership with the British Library, that now delivers content plus rights to 1.7 million staff potentially in the NHS in England. That does 2 things. Firstly, it makes us more transparent and more tangible to everybody in the NHS, which is great. They can see that they're getting value from the CLA. And secondly, it actually provides us with an automated and very high level of data from which to base our distributions on. So you should expect to see us do more in this space. James will talk a bit more about it. The most exciting one in terms of development is a pilot that we've just kicked off in the higher education sector, and we are working with 5 universities to develop or transform our licensing solution into higher education, basically. And the goal of that pilot and development is really to give higher education a solution whereby they can use those rights and the content that they generate from those rights within their day-to-day workflows, and that CLA will embed within that solution a basic workflow tool that will remove all of the reporting burden from those universities. So it's very progressive. So far, I think we've got a couple of university reps in the room. So far, the response has been really positive, and we'll update you in due course. But these are 3 areas where we are moving beyond what we've traditionally called a blanket license and evolving. Just looking at time, I'm probably running over. So in terms of what we need from you, it's really 2 things, I think, which is firstly your continued support. Without your mandates, we cannot license, we cannot offer solutions, we cannot work with the customers. So please continue to sign up with PLS, to consider the new mandates that we ask for, and sign up in good time. Georgina, is that your mobile? Sorry to embarrass you. So, and then I think the second thing to think about, sorry Georgina, is the second thing is really that you'll have noticed from those two initiatives, or the last two, that we're talking about content. And that's quite a different thing for CLA to be talking about. We're talking about workflow tools. That's very different as well. And so we are going to be coming to you with new ideas, new initiatives that actually make you think differently about CLA. And I would just urge you to consider something that Sarah said earlier, is we work for you, we're owned by you. We're actually not for profit, and we have incredible market penetration. So I think there are greater opportunities for us to work together. Finally, I've got a few thank yous. Firstly, thank you to everybody at PLS, Sarah, Mark, but all the team in supporting what we're doing. Thank you to ALCS. We're all moving in together, but actually the last 12 months has been huge change. It's been great. Everybody's worked well. And last but not least, thank you to my team at CLA. We've been through a period of massive change in the last 12 months. It's been really difficult, but despite that, we've had a fantastic year, best ever revenues, and actually we're really moving forward. So that's all I'm going to say. I think David's up next, and then we'll take questions together. Okay?
Thank you very much indeed. And now you've heard a lot about NLA Media Access, and here is the Managing Director, David Pugh. David.
Thank you, Mark. As I haven't addressed this meeting before, I thought I'd take the opportunity to give you a short overview of our business. Like Matt, I'm conscious of time and that I stand between you and a cup of tea. But a short overview of who we are, what we do, in particular to focus on why we concentrate as a business on the media monitoring market, and a little bit about the future, and in particular why everybody in the room who cares about copyright should buy Mick Hucknall a beer next time they see him at a bar. So, looking at the business as a whole, this is a timeline for development of our business. We're a limited company. We're owned by the 8 national newspaper publishers, but in total we work for 230 publishers, and now through our contract with PLS, including magazine publishers. Some of you are in the room today, and what we do is to license their print and web edition content, and to help them control the use of that content in the digital age. We've grown, as this chart is hoping to show, through investment and innovation. And in our case, investment, or the big investments, have taken two forms. Spending money with my learned friends to establish legal precedent that underpins our print licensing. A big case with Marks and Spencer went to the House of Lords in the 90s. And our web licensing, a case with Meltwater, which I'll talk about later on. Our other key investment has been in building the Eclipse database that Matt referenced earlier, a database of content. And then innovation has been in getting new, growing content, getting more rights from publishers, creating more license types, and new database services. And all of that is ultimately reflected in our sales growth, with the key investments highlighted there. So, the media monitoring market, why do we focus on that? Well, our business model is very simple. We focus on media monitoring agencies, formerly known, perhaps more familiar to some of you as press cuttings agencies, from an era when they did rather less than they do now. And the reason we do it is simply because they are the gateway to clients. It's maths. We get 5% of our revenue from monitoring agencies, companies like Gorkana and Precise, but 85% of our licensing revenue comes through their clients. And by licensing the agencies, we can monitor the flow of print and web content. discover who their clients are, how much use of content they make, which means that we can then accurately license clients, but also we can be very accurate in our distribution back to publishers every month. In effect, we have in the UK 15 sales and compliance teams working for us, but they're a pathway to 200,000 plus clients. And then by adding our database service, we developed the Eclipse Database in 2006. We did that with two objectives. Firstly, to stimulate licensing revenue by making content more easily available. That revenue chart I showed you earlier would have showed our licensing revenue tanking some 5 years ago if we had not done that. But also to control the use of that content. In simple terms, it's better to have it in our database than in somebody else's. So what exactly is media monitoring? The chart here demonstrates the evolution of that business between 1860 and 1990. In 1860, Charles Dickens would have been a personal client of Durrant's, now known as Gorkana. And he employed them to tell him what the press said about a range of topics, just as a client would today. And the way that worked was that Durrant's went out and garnered up lots of copies of every edition in Fleet Street, and then someone sat up through the night with his brief in their head and a pair of scissors in their hand and turned the pages, cut out the articles and put them in the post so that they could be on his breakfast table. The post was a bit more efficient in those days. By the early 1990s, so Dickens top left, by the early 1990s, when I was a client at the Daily Telegraph, it worked this way. Somebody garnered up lots of copies of all the editions from Fleet Street, had my brief in their head, a pair of scissors in their hand, cut out articles, and then put them on a fax. And that's progress. However, like many businesses, the internet, the rapid rise of technology, scanning, and indeed direct feeds from the Eclipse database have moved it on, so that it's no longer about people with scissors. They've been replaced by an algorithm, which cleverly written algorithms that zip through XML. This is a human readable form of it, and the example here would be the keyword labour. Now, the clever bit from the media monitoring point of view is to be able to distinguish between socialism and childbirth, both of which can be painful and possibly beneficial. And the end product these days is an email rather than post or fax. That would be a typical morning mail that the management team at NLA gets, with a headline, perhaps a snippet of text, and a link to click on if you want to actually see the print article, which is probably in our Eclipse database, or a web article. But the thing is, clients only click on about 3% of those links. And there are two simple reasons for that. One, they get enough information from the email. You only need to read that a company made £3 million profit once, unless you work there and want every bit of the detail. But also because they're just too busy. Richard Branson doesn't have time to read 250 articles about himself every day. What they want is real-time analysis. What's being written? What did it say? Is it good news, bad news, and what can I do about it? The exception to the trend of not actually wanting to look at articles is when there's bad news. When revisionist theories about Jimmy Savile began to circulate, the BBC not only generated more coverage, but they were reading all of those articles rather intently. And when we discovered the possibility that we all might be dining on horse meat, then the PR officers at supermarkets were reading those articles and giving them a lot of attention. So looking to the future, and hopefully this is not it, I'll explain how Mick Hucknall has contributed to copyright licensing and why all of you should be grateful. Back in 2008, a very long time ago now, NLA, led by Andrew, who's in the front row here, sought to future-proof our licensing scheme. We figured that PR officers, like policemen, are getting younger, and that they would flip from monitoring print to web. And our publishers could see a revenue stream disappear overnight. So we put together a licensing scheme, and all was looking good until an online web cuttings agency called Meltwater, who was scraping the web and providing a service to their clients, disagreed and felt that content that they were providing wanted to be free. Maybe an argument you've come across. And over a 5-year battle, which went from the High Court to the European Court with the Copyright Tribunal in between, we successfully argued that a snippet of text or a headline could attract copyright protection. And one of the key ways in which we did that was to show the skill and invention that's involved in generating a headline. And I can tell you, quite apart from the examples here, it's a delight to hear a well-educated High Court judge rehearse the words, "trunk's too tight to mention." But they did the job. The real hero is indeed Justice Proudman, who, as you can see here, decided that headlines are capable of being literary works. And it was fully supported by the Court of Appeal. And you can see Lord Grantham got in on the act, which is the basis for our web licensing regime. The surprise to us is that actually things have not flipped from print to web. 90% of our licensing revenue is still linked to print editions, and actually that probably mirrors what's going on in many newspaper publishers' businesses. But the fact is, web is the future. So another way in which we are looking to future-proof our business is to make the data that we provide more relevant. We've developed a service to clients called AIM, which tells them not only that an article, good or bad, has been written about them, but gives them for the first time information on how many people have actually read it on the web. And then allied to that, was it tweeted, retweeted, and how important were the people doing that? Which is absolutely vital to know if journalists are doing their job and putting in print things you didn't want to see there. And so a final strand of our approach to the future, which Matt has already hinted at, is that we see very clearly that our role is to generate revenues for our publishers, but we recognise that we can't necessarily do that on our own. Sarah referred to collaboration earlier, and we've put that into practice by recognising that although we have a strength in the commercial licensing sector, we recognise that CLA has a great expertise in the education area. And 18 months ago, we outsourced licensing of newspapers to CLA. And the goal there it was a simple business decision to say, well, who will do this best? Who will raise most money for our rights holders? That's worked out very well for the license holders, schools and universities can now get a license from one agency instead of two, something that Richard Hooper has been advocating for a long time. And it's worked out very well for our publishers because CLA has grown, we've just completed the first year, has grown revenue and is continuing to do so as we go into year two. So we see partnership and collaboration as an important way forward because it will enable us to focus on what we're good at, it will be more efficient, gives clients and ultimately publishers more choice. Thank you.
We should give you a chance to ask questions of either David or Matt if you have any. Are there any? For whom? Are you?
David.
David.
Can you hear me? Do we have
There's a roving mic.
Yes, good.
It's on, yes.
Good afternoon. David, you might have heard of SME. Well, in my publishing company, the M stands for microscopic. And your speech was news to me, but obviously I have already started, a newsletter on a website. So would you cater for someone as tiny as I am compared with the big newspaper groups?
We do license web-only published content, but our guide, as I said in my presentation, is we focus on the media monitoring agencies. If your publication is on their reading list because their clients are interested in it, then yes, potentially. If what you're publishing, not wishing to be rude, is not of interest to them or their clients, then I don't think we could do anything for you.
So where would we go then?
Come and have a conversation. George, who's in the middle of the room there somewhere, will happily advise you.
There's a question at the back.
Question from Matt. What
Matt,
are the
come up.
5 universities that you're working with?
Sorry, can't see the... gosh, you put me on the spot now. Manchester, LSE, Nottingham, and I'm looking at James, Middlesex, and Sheffield, of course. How could I forget? Sorry, my mind was elsewhere, but those 5, yes.
Any other questions? In that case, I think we can probably break for tea. Tea is expected to last for 20 minutes. It should be just outside, I hope. And then please go to the breakout room that you are expected at.